all coming and signing on a little bit early. I'd forgotten about a meeting that I had today at 2 o'clock. So as I said, we're going to be talking about the mammals. Now, I want to step back for just a second. Let me see if I can find that dinosaur picture. I want to make a connection here, or not the dinosaur picture. I want to make a connection with an animal that we looked at. I got to go back a number of slides. How long is this going to take, I wonder? Give me a second here. Because it's important so we can make the connection between the reptiles and going into the mammals. So give me 1 second, go right there. You remember this fellow right here that we were talking about? Dimetrodon, right here in the middle. Now, Dimetrodon is very often called a dinosaur, right? If you buy a pack of dinosaurs, little plastic dinosaurs for your kids, there'll be a Tyrannosaurus, there'll be a Brontosaurus, and always seems to be a Dimetrodon in there. Well, the funny thing about that is by rights, a Dimetrodon is not a dinosaur, okay? You see, the thing is having to do with the skulls up above. Dinosaurs have diapsid skulls, and reptiles today have diapsid skulls, or they have anapsid skulls. There's a few reptiles that have anapsid skulls. Turtles have anapsid skulls. But the skull difference in there, in the Dimetrodons have synapsid skulls, okay? And that right there makes it not a dinosaur, but actually a reptile-like mammal, or maybe a mammal-like reptile, or actually more accurately, we should say it's on the path to mammals. So this is actually a pretty good illustration of these transitional changes, right? So this is back to this whole thing that we talked about all semester long with Aristotle and the ladders. There's a bunch of little rungs in between the ladders. So let me show you what I mean by that. So Dimetrodon was a synapsid organism. It was a synapsid amniote, all right? So it laid an egg. It could lay an egg out of water. And you can see right here what the synapsids led to were the mammals. So if we take a look at a little bit more detail, so this is the same picture as before. There's the synapsid line. Here we are up here in the upper right. All of these in between, by the way, Dimetrodon fits into this group right here. Okay, all of these organisms in between are called non-mammalian synapsids. So what are they? Well, it depends. If you're closer to the synapsid line, if you're closer down towards here, then we would consider, now all of these organisms are extinct. All these non-mammalian synapsids are extinct. Obviously the ones in the red in the upper right are not. So if we were looking back towards the synapsid juncture, we might call these critters reptile-like mammals, okay? And then as we worked our way up beyond the therapsids and the cynodonts, for example, then we might consider them more mammal-like reptiles. And I know that's not very scientific, but understand that what you're seeing here is a great example of sort of this gradual evolutionary change that occurred in the lineage. Now notice that all of those other critters, right, all those other critters that are not in bold type, those have all gone extinct. So all those non-mammalian synapsids have gone extinct. So there are no more part reptile, part mammals running around. You're either a reptile or a mammal. But I think this is kind of a neat slide here because what it does to me is it kind of shows that little stair-step progression that occurs sometimes. You remember Darwin knew of evolution's pace as gradualism, and gradualism does occur. Sometimes it's punctuated equilibrium, but this would be an example of more of a gradual change through time. So what happened off of that reptilian line is an organism with a different type of skull, a synapsid type skull, eventually through time, through gradual changes in organisms, gave rise to those three groups of mammals that we see up there in the upper right. The monotremes, the marsupials, and then you and I, we belong to the placental mammals. Okay? So let's talk about what makes a mammal a mammal. Well, the first thing we always think about with a mammal is the fact that they're furry, all right? They have hair. Mammals are rather specialized organisms, though, too, in a variety of ways. And that's why there tend to be some of the lowest diversity among the vertebrates, only about 5,000 or so species. And most of those are the rats, bats, shrews and moles. Shrews and moles are burrowing organisms that live down in the dirt. So most of the critters, as far as mammalian vertebrates, going to belong to that group as well. Now, hair is something that has been modified in a variety of different ways in many different mammals. Hair is made out of keratin, and of course, if you're a mammal, a warm-blooded critter, one of the things that the hair does is it provides insulation, right? Keeps you warm. Really awesome picture of a tiger here, right? Camouflage. Hair's really good at camouflaging. You can see how well that could move through the brush, right? Sensory structures. This is Cooper taking a nap up here, and Cooper has these little whiskers. These are sensory structures, okay? In the case of the porcupine down here, defensive, right? Those quills in a porcupine are defensive structures. Porcupines, by the way, can't throw their quills. I know sometimes in the cartoons you've seen that before. Now, as far as like the whiskers on Cooper, the picture of the whale down here, the killer whale, the reason why I'm showing you that is that adult whales don't have hair. They're mammals, but we always say that their mammalian characteristic of hair gets lost very early on. Young killer whales are born with rostral hairs up around their nose, which they actually helps them feel when they're up next to the mother as their eyesight is improving. Those rostral hairs eventually fall off because in the water, hair is actually a hydrodynamic drag, so you want to get rid of that. Now, this doesn't include the fact that hair could also be used in different colors and different textures, so it could have a communication sort of thing to it, perhaps during a mating ritual, those kinds of things. The hair, of course, is important because, like I said, we're endothermic, we're warm-blooded. Our name comes from the fact that we have mammary glands. There's no other organism out there that has mammary glands, right? Mammary glands, in other words, what we do is we provide some nutrition for the young after it's born. You see the picture in the upper right of the human fetus there, we've got that placental interface, really tiny, small yolk sac. No energy, really, not enough sustenance in that yolk sac to supply for that developing fetus. So we got to have that placental interface. So all of those extra embryonic membranes that we learned about in the egg, the chorion and the allantois, specifically the chorion and the allantois are going to kind of join together and form part of the placental tissue. But we do have an amnion. See, it's labeled right there. So an amniotic sac that surrounds the offspring keeps it from drying out. Remember, that's not something that we share alone. The reptiles have that as well. Mammals tend to be larger animals. If you're endothermic, you tend to have higher metabolic rates. If you're warm-blooded, so you're going to have a bigger heart, much more efficient circulatory system. So we're going to have a 4-chambered heart, a diaphragm. So now we breathe differently than, remember how the amphibians breathe, right? Through buccal breathing. Open their mouth, take a gulp of air, and basically they're swallowing the air. We are what we call thoracic breathers. All right, mammals are thoracic breathers. They breathe from their thorax, from their chest. Right, it's the diaphragm. So as the diaphragm is pulled down, it creates a vacuum, and air rushes into your chest. And then as the diaphragm is pushed up, it causes air to be forced back out of your lungs and out of your chest. And for the most part, mammals have larger relative brains than the other vertebrates out there. Many mammals are capable of relatively complex thought, right? Some humans are capable of relatively complex thought, and some are not. Down there at the bottom, just showing you the extremes of mammal caretaking. That's a harp seal, H-A-R-P. These are the ones years ago everybody got upset about because people were going out clubbing them over the head because they use them as fur. You can wear them, right? But take a look at the harp seal. Think about the environment that it lives in, that cold environment of the Arctic. The harp seal mother's milk is about half fat. So it's like drinking cream, basically. The pup gains about 2.5 kilos or about 5 pounds a day and weans in only 12 days. That's amazing. So in a little under 2 weeks, this animal born from this completely dependent offspring, because that milk is so rich in fat, and because that pup gains weight so fast that within about 2 weeks, that animal can be weaned to be on its own. It's amazing. But you think about the environment that it lives in, right? They live in that harsh, cold environment of the Arctic, that this kind of quick weaning would actually be beneficial. Weaning is something very interesting. I've studied weaning a couple of times in killer whales. Weaning is It's actually kind of a conflict, to be honest with you. Weaning is the offspring getting a free meal, essentially, from the mom, and yet the mom is losing resources by feeding the offspring. Now, there's a benefit for her to feed the offspring, but only for a period of time. So there becomes this conflict between the mother and the offspring, whereas the mother says, all right, I've done enough for you as far as nursing you. And in many cases, the female's got to start thinking about the next young that she's going to have. So she's got to start conserving resources. You're old enough and you're big enough to be on your own. But of course, from the young point of view, why pass up a free meal? And nursing is a free meal. Weaning occurs when that conflict gets resolved, right? When that conflict gets resolved and the young understand, or it's set up in such a way that the young no longer will feed upon the mom, then weaning has occurred. So it's kind of an interesting little battle that occurs, and it was interesting to me among killer whales. Okay, like I said, the diversity among mammals has a lot to do with the different lifestyles they live, a lot to do with the different kind of teeth they have. For example, different mammals have different types of teeth based on how they live their life. Dogs have grinding teeth, or like molars, and they have ripping teeth. They have chiseling teeth, so they can chisel away. If you're a deer, all you got is grinding teeth. You're a herbivore. Beavers are herbivores too, just like elephants. They do have these big chiseling teeth, but in the case of beavers, that chiseling teeth have been turned into a chisel. That's how they are able to cut down the trees. And in the elephant, the tusks are used for protection and for combat. We're that way too. We have chiseling teeth, we have grinding teeth, and we also have ripping teeth. So what we say is our dentition is varied, which allows us to make use of many different kinds of resources. A lot of members of the group that are herbivorous get by because they have mutualistic bacteria. You remember you learned in Bio 1 that cellulose, which is a high concentrations in plant material, is not digestible by most animals, by most mammals for sure. And those mutualistic bacteria that live in the gut, right? That's a mutualistic relationship. They have a nice warm place to live and reproduce, and what they do is they help break down that cellulose. Mammals are known, many mammals are known by having hooves or horns or antlers. A hoof is something like you might see in that picture up above. That's actually a keratin pad. A hoof is really a fingernail. If you want to sort of get an idea of the way a horse hoof compares to you, see if I can do it with my finger. I'm going to put my finger right up to the screen. If the nail of my finger grew thicker and then wrapped around either side of my finger, that's what a hoof would look like. All right, so this is right here is actually called the frog of a horse. This is the frog, but that's the tip of the horse's toe. Okay, and then the hoof is the thickened nail that is grown around it. And it's like our nails, it still needs to grow. That's why there are farriers that come out and trim the hooves and file the hooves for organisms. Okay, so we have hooves, horns, which are bones surrounded by keratin, or antlers, which are bone and don't have keratin. Now the difference is horns are not lost while antlers are lost. Antlers are replaced. It's the velvet that you see in that buck in the lower right, the velvet that provides the nutrients for the growing bone underneath, and then every year they shed those things. Unique among mammals is the fact that there are flying members too. There are bats. These are the only mammals that can fly, and what they've done, really cool little modification, is they've taken their appendages. This is their finger bones, folks. We talked about this in class. And they've attached a membrane in between them called a patagium. And now you got something that can fly. We have these bats here in Florida, Brazilian free-tailed bats. Free-tailed bats because you can see the tail very clearly. Now, of course, everybody has these misnomers about bats getting down your hair and attacking you, and of course, none of that is true. Most of the bats the bats we have here in Florida, for the most part, feed upon insects. Now, their navigation in the dark using echolocation, that's incredible, right? It's basically a radar system. We always talk about being blind as a bat. They may not be able to see very well necessarily, but they do have that radar, so they can zoom in on. That's what, if you look at them sometimes up close, they have very odd faces. They have Many times they have really, really, really big ears, so they can listen for that echolocation. It's like sonar, except sonar's in water. Dolphins and many cetaceans have echolocation as well. All right, so very cool. Mammalian evolution. All right, so synapsids. So what we have here among the synapsids are synapsids that are the extinct reptilian-like synapses, and then we have the extant mammalian-like synapses. Now, mammals didn't evolve again. It isn't a progression. They didn't evolve necessarily after the dinosaurs went extinct. They're around during the dinosaurs, about 200 million years ago. All three groups of mammals, the monotremes, the marsupials, and the placental, were all here by the early Cretaceous and then really kind of radiated out if the dinosaurs took a hike. Here's some synapsid reptile synapsid mammals, and please keep in mind that the word reptile and mammal is a little occluded here. In other words, when does a synapsid reptile become a synapsid mammal? But it's some pretty interesting looking critters. Obviously, these guys have all gone extinct. Now, during the dinosaur era, it was rough living, right? The dinosaurs were doing a really good job of cleaning up on the little tiny mammals that ran around. They were nice little tidbits to eat. So the mammals evolved by becoming small, kind of like shrews. They were insectivores. They ate insects, and they lived up in the trees for the most part. They were arboreal and nocturnal. And we know that because when we look at the fossils of some of these mammals from this time period, we see very large eye sockets, and that's an indication of being nocturnal. So that's a way to kind of protect yourself, right? If you don't come out during the day when the dinosaurs are more active, then you got a better chance of surviving. So our first ancestors were more nocturnal types of critters. Oh, the jaw. This is really cool. Reptiles can hear, but they don't hear with the complexity and the detail that we do. We're much better hearers. We're much better at hearing, and that's all because of a modification to the jaws. Modifications to reptilian jaws allowed us to have much better sound amplification. And what I'm getting ready to describe to you, this migration of the bones, even occurs today still in mammalian embryos. So there's a little hint into our evolutionary past. Take a look at the picture in the middle. Take a look at the skull up top and the three bones that are colored. There's there's four bones that are colored. There's the squamosal in purple. There's the green quadrate. The orange one is the articular, and then the dentary. All right. Now down below, a present-day reptile's ear. The eardrum or the tympanum is connected to the stapes, and the stapes vibrates against the inner ear, and that's how they hear sound. So they hear sound, but again, it's kind of like the way insects see things with their compound eyes. All right. Throughout evolutionary change, here's what happened. As synapsid reptiles became synapsid mammals, and then true mammals, the articular, the one that's in the orange, and the one that's in the green, the quadrate, moved, to the middle part of the ear. The articular and the quadrate, all of those bones being part of the mammalian jaw, become the inner bones, or the bones of the inner ear, the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. You can see as I'm matching it up, right? So the articular becomes the malleus, for the hammer. The quadrate became the incus, or the anvil, and then that last one is the stapes, right? So those three bones in our middle ear allowed us to have a much better resolution of sound. So that was a big difference between reptiles and us. And again, it's kind of like we were talking, where did jaws come from? They came from the skeletal rods that held up the gills at the front of the organism's body. It's kind of the same thing here. It's just a modification of an existing structure. So these jaw bones, right, become part of the inner ear, and that conveys an advantage because of the increased ability to hear in detail. Kind of interesting to think about that, right? Your inner ear is part reptilian, part of a reptilian skull. All right, the three groups, the monotremes, the pouched marsupials, and the eutherian, or placental mammals. The monotremes are the most ancestral mammals. They actually lay eggs. There's a picture there up at the top of the eggs of a platypus. Look like about the size, I guess, of a jelly bean. I always think how incredible it must have been for some of the first investigators when they went to Australia and they saw a monotreme. They saw a platypus. Now, you only find these things in Australia. The platypus that you see there, and then the spiny anteater, or the echidna. That's another monotreme. By then, we all knew what mammals were: fur, warm-blooded, and all that sort of stuff. And they actually nurture the young. Now, platypus do nurture their young as well. Basically, they don't have well-developed nipples, but they have areas on their body where the young, these are the little young ones here in that picture, they actually lick the milk. So it's not an area, the milk kind of gathers in that area, kind of in a pit. But they lay eggs. So again, I wonder what the first folks who went there thought, oh, this is a mammal, but it lays eggs? Oh, it's weird, right? Australia's so strange with all the strange organisms. Other characteristics that kind of tie them into the primitive aspect of it, they have a cloaca, right? We talked about a cloaca in the shark, which is that common area for the digestive and the excretory and the reproductive systems. We found it in other animals as well. Australia, and New Guinea as well. So these two critters, those are the monotremes. Now, the pouch critters, the marsupials. A marsupium, let me go to the chat box here. There we go. A marsupium is a pouch. It's a pouch. So a marsupial is a pouched mammal. All right, now these give birth to live young. They don't lay eggs. But what we say about them, and there's the possum. Opossums are marsupials. The only North American marsupial we have is the possum. Kangaroos are marsupials. There's little Joey sticking his head out of a marsupium. Marsupial mammals differ from placental mammals in the sense that the young, the developing embryo is only developed so far. It's kind of half-baked. Marsupial mammals have a very short-lived yolk placenta, and then the rest of the development occurs in the marsupium. So, for example, in the case of the kangaroo, that young Joey has to crawl out of the birth canal, up her fur, and make its way into the pouch. And of course, with the little tiny legs that the kangaroo has up front, she can't help very much. And if he falls off, potentially the animal's lost. So they crawl into the pouch, and in the pouch they continue to develop. All right, so that's what I mean by the embryo, the offspring are kind of half cooked. The placental mammals just kind of take that to the next extreme. Placental mammals, you have a development of the offspring inside the female with a true placental interface. This allows for much more fetal development prior to parturition or birth, much better chance for the young to survive. And this is a theme that we've talked about a couple of times. Now, being a placental mammal was the most successful of all the mammals, and that's why we get this rapid diversification that occurred before the dinosaurs went extinct, and definitely after the dinosaurs went extinct. And we end up today with most mammals being the placental mammals. So let's take a look at some of the major groups of mammals. This is kind of like the insects again. I'm not going to go through all of them. I would like you to know the monotremes and the marsupials, obviously the two big groups. And then among the placental mammals, Sirenia would be nice to know, especially since we have manatees here in Florida. That's Sirenia comes from the fact that the sirens during Odysseus's adventure. The sirens were those singers that sat on an island and lured sailors to come closer and closer, and they would crash on the island and die. So some of the very first Europeans, when they came over to this part of the world and they saw a manatee, to them it kind of looked like one of those female fictitious mermaid-like critters. I don't know, I guess I got to be out at sea quite a while before a manatee looks like a mermaid to me, but that's where the Sirenian name comes from. Sirenians, by the way, manatees, their closest relative are elephants. Elephants and manatees have a very close relationship. The mouth of a manatee, if you ever see them feed, it's very dexterous. They can move that mouth quite a bit. It's kind of like the trunk on an elephant. Aardvarks and hyraxes, a couple of smaller groups. The rabbits, the lagomorphs. Lagomorphs have hind legs longer than front legs. And, of course, the rodents. We've got to talk about the rodents, right? As I said, the rodents are some of the more common out there. And then the primates, and we'll talk about the primates a little bit more detail, especially humans, in just a second. We have our opposable thumbs. That's our big thing. Rodents have those continually growing incisors, their front teeth that they chill on continually grow. They actually, if they don't have something to wear them down on, they'll get too long. They actually have to, they wear them down to keep them in a reasonable length by using them to gnaw and stuff. Here's some examples of some mammals. A capybara in the upper left, that's the world's largest rodent found in South America. That's a big rodent, isn't it? They actually eat them down there. Look like they're big enough to eat. Manatees down below. To the right of the manatee is the Australian version. Australians have a syrinid, or Indo-Pacific. It's called a dugong. That's a dugong. Big difference between a dugong and a manatee. Well, one of the big differences is the... oh, great. This is why we need big, giant capybaras running all over. Wild? Dugong's tails are forked. Manatees are paddle. Who brought him into the state? Click on that link. They were, what were people raising them for food? Yeah, I got the article. That's incredible. I would say they probably be pretty destructive too. Been introduced to North Florida. Yeah. Rodents in general are really problematic when it comes to being invasive. One of the reasons is that many rodents, rats, for example, are very good at rafting. And what I mean by that is they're very good at floating for long periods of time on bits of floating debris throughout large expanses of ocean, so they can make it across these huge oceanic distances when most organisms wouldn't be able to make it. I recall in specifically when I was in the Navy one time being out in the middle of the Pacific and coming up on this, there's all kinds of garbage that's out floating in the ocean. It's horrible to think about, but sometimes you're out in the middle of nowhere and there's this big pile of garbage floating there. And we were, as the ship was moving up, I noticed with my binoculars on this pile of floating garbage, there was stuff moving around on it. And as I got closer, I realized what it was. It was a bunch of rats. We're literally hundreds or thousands of miles out to sea. Now, back to what we said from the beginning of the semester, you know that most of those rats won't make it. Probably all of them probably won't make it. But every once in a while, right, that founder effect, some of them do make it. And so rats and their relatives have spread throughout the world. They're also good at stowing away on ships too. And this rat in the picture there is staying on a ship, a mooring line. That's why sometimes if you go down to the docks, this is your cruise ship, the mooring line will have this metal structure on it, shaped like this, called a rat guard. It's to prevent the rats from crawling up the line and getting aboard ship. Although I have seen on more than one occasion rats get up here and actually make their way across the rat guard. They're pretty clever critters. I always wonder what a pica was. So this is a pica. A neat little rodent critter. Now, rabbits. There are no rabbits with big teeth like that. When I was a kid many years ago, my dad took me to go see a movie called Night of the Lepus, and it was about these giant rabbits that grew huge, like two of them would fit side by side on a road. These giant rabbits are going around killing people. And ever since then, it's kind of weird. I've always had this leery thing about rabbits. You know, like a rabbit, like, I don't know, I don't trust you guys. You know, you look all cute and fuzzy jumping around. But given the opportunity, if you grew bigger, I remember one line in the movie, the rabbits went through town and they killed everybody in town. It looked like somebody went through town with a chainsaw. Let's see, well, I guess rabbits would have to have pretty substantial teeth to be able to do that. But this is actually a photo still from the movie. Giant killer rabbits. He even looks mean, doesn't he? Looks like he ain't messing around. Of course, the carnivore, the dogs and wolves and all that. Oh, the artiodactyls or the cetartiodactyls. Interesting discussion many years ago among mammalogists is where did the marine mammals come from? In other words, what group of mammals gave rise to the marine mammals? Now, we know marine mammals, dolphins, and whales and such, went secondarily back to the ocean. In other words, Life evolved in the ocean, crawled out on land, mammals evolved, and then a group of mammals, presumably mammals that probably made their living near the ocean, eventually moved back into living completely in the ocean. We talked about that in evolution. That's why you find those vestigial structures on animals and that, on the whales and dolphins, those vestigial pelvic girdles. Well, artiodactyls, the land artiodactyls are known by having an even number of toes. So this deer print down here automatically gives it away that a deer must be an artiodactyl. Well, as the research was put out, we found out that it looked like the evidence was showing us that cetaceans, marine mammals, are closely related to these even-toed ungulates. Even-toed ungulates are artiodactyls. Ungulates like deer would fit in this group as well, right? So you can see that the relationship is kind of interesting. Actually, the sister group to cetaceans. Sorry about that, folks. Disconnected there for a second. All right, so marine mammals are most closely related to hippopotamus, but a member of this large group of organisms called the even-toed ungulates. So I like that little poster in the upper right. The closest relative to a marine mammal in one of the more common types of animals would be a cow, right? So cetaceans are artiodactyls. That's where the lineage came out of. The animal that moved back into the ocean, the mammal that moved back into the ocean, was related to cows and deer and even-toed ungulates like that. The horses, the zebras, those are odd number of toes, so those are called the perissodactyl. So if you're artiodactyl, you have an even number of toes. If you're perissodactyl, you have an odd number of toes. Like horses have one. That thing that I showed you, that tip of the hook, that's one of the appendages. The other appendages have actually shrunk down on the horse's leg and become nothing but splints. Horses basically have one finger, this one right here, one digit that is their entire leg structure that holds them up. The rest of the stuff is shrunk down to nothing but little splints. The Chiroptera, which are the only ones that fly, and then of course there's all the moles and the shrews and those guys out there. Here's some pretty cool bats. We have 13 species of bats in Florida. These are bat houses. If you ever seen them up on the tree, sometimes out in the woods. Why would anybody want to provide houses for bats? Well, bats are good at getting rid of insects, for one thing. So we do want bats around. They're an important part of the ecosystem. The largest bat in the world is this giant golden-crowned flying fox. You can see why it's called a flying fox. It looks like a dog. Look at the one eating. I guess that's a banana hanging upside down. They're found in the Philippines. That's a good-sized bat. Look at that girl holding that up. What's really cool though is you can see the elongated digits, right? Of course, it's all highly vascularized as well, and then you can see the membrane in between. You see bats around here in Florida. I see them out in my backyard a lot of times, chasing around the insects. All right, now this is not an anthropology course, so I'm not going to teach anthropology, but just like all the critters that we've talked about all semester long, human beings evolve through a variety of stops and starts, right? So, for example, we have the organisms that we call the hominids, that we call the Australopithecines. And there's the Paranthropus. And then up and above, the one in the middle, that's the group that's going to involve us. And there's only one species of human left, right? There's only Homo sapiens. Homo neanderthalensis was the one that died right before us. So it was Homo neanderthalensis, then Homo sapiens. Homo erectus, Homo habilis. Homo habilis was the handyman. Homo habilis was able to use tools. The major thing that we see happen among human beings in this part of the tree is an enlargement of the cranial capacity. So an enlargement in intelligence or cognition, if you will. And then people talk about our ancestors among the chimpanzees. Way over on a limb out here, we have the chimpanzees and the bonobo monkeys that are distantly related to us. Now, we got lots of evidence to suggest what it was like for these early humans. Lucy in the upper right lived about 3.2 million years ago. She's an Australopithecine, and she might have looked something like down below, right? Which is interesting because that's kind of I don't know, an ape-like looking human sort of thing. Now, remember what Charles Darwin said. Darwin did not say that we evolved from an ape. There's no ape down here at the basis of our family tree. There is an ape-like ancestor, and what we mean by that is one part of that lineage from that ape-like ancestor gave rise to the humans and all of their relatives and the hominids, we call it, and then the other branch of it gave rise to the rest of the primates, the chimps, and all those other things. So that's what we mean by an ape-like ancestor. So that's kind of what we think Lucy may have looked like. We know Lucy was a female by looking at her at her pelvic girdle. Females and males have differences in their pelvic girdles. Now, the Laetoli footprints on the left-hand side is interesting because this is fossilized footprints. Well, this was the first indication that some of the early hominids being able to walk up bipedal. And remember, that was an extremely important change that occurred among these organisms because as the environment began to dry out during this time and there was less forests, organisms had to move out of the forest into the open area. And when you're out in the open area, in the plains and the grasslands and all that sort of stuff, you're obviously subject to increased predation because you're much more visible. But from a predator point of view, you have an advantage if you're bipedal because you can stand up on those hind legs and you can see things ahead of you like that. So the Laetoli footprints are really interesting. I don't know how old they are. Your book says something about how old they are, but these are some of the first evidence of an organism, a hominid that was bipedal. All right. That's it for that chapter. So let me stop the recording. Oh, okay. So that's it for the chapter. That's it for the information you need to know for the last exam. That's it for the semester. Last exam again is going to go through just the animals, chapters 32, 33, and 34. So once again, remember we will not have lecture on Monday. I will send out a announcement on Blackboard just to make sure everybody's on the same page. And then your exam again is on Wednesday. And your exam on Wednesday is at 2 o'clock. All right, so it's the same time we normally meet for class. And it'll be in room 216. It'll be in the computer room upstairs. All right, let me turn the recording off.